Welcome to Circle Time, the Early Years podcast. I'm Glenn Denny. On this edition, I'm speaking to an established early years writer, trainer, and speaker, a person who is passionate and committed to inclusion, diversity in early childhood. Their latest book is Little Brains Matter, a practical guide to brain development and neuroscience in early childhood. Welcome to the podcast, Debbie Garvey.
Hi, Glenn. How are you?
I'm very well, and it's lovely to catch up with you. We haven't seen each other in absolutely ages.
But time just flies, doesn't it? And then with the pandemic and everything, I don't think anybody saw anybody for such a long time. And I'm speaking to people this month who were saying, gosh, I haven't seen you for 4 years. And it's ridiculous, but we haven't seen people for 4 years because in the middle of that, we couldn't see anybody anyway.
No, apart from on a screen. But
yes.
But it was that bit where, the whole world kind of reopened and everything, didn't it? So, and slowly everything's kind of going back to some sort of, I don't want to use the word normality, but you know what I mean? Because
new normal.
New normal, yes. Oh, I hate that phrase. So, I mean, Debbie, your new book's out right now, Little Brains Matter. And, what for you was the key? Like, why neuroscience? What led you down that path?
I suppose for a while, it's been the book I needed to write. Because I know that if we can get practitioners talking about neuroscience, a lot of the other stuff falls into place. Mm-hmm. So I'd put a little bit in the previous book, in the PSED book, the behaviors and neuroscience. There's a little bit in there about neuroscience, but I knew I wanted to go to it in more depth. But it was getting the timing right. People weren't talking about it, and it was making sure that timing was right. So I started writing it 2019, and then the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. And the world stopped, and I could have carried on writing during that time, but I was very, very conscious that there would be a great deal of research came out of the pandemic around the impact on children's brains.
Yes.
So I had Claire Ashworth, the editor at Speechmark, is just fabulous. She's the most wonderful person to work with. So I had a word with her and said, look, I'd like to put this on hold for a little bit. I'll still keep doing little bits in the background, but I don't want to do the whole thing until we see some of the research that comes out. And that was one of the reasons I put the dedication in the beginning to recognise the global pandemic, mm-hmm. and to recognise the difficulties that children's brains had faced during the pandemic and the impact that adults have on that, either to the good or the not so good.
Yeah.
Whether it's intentional or unintentional, whether it's conscious or unconscious. So I wanted that highlighted in there. So there isn't a huge amount in the book about the pandemic, but some of the research that I talk about is linked to the pandemic. And I guess more of that will come out as we go along. I didn't want it to be a depressing book. So it was very much about, it's in there and it's mentioned, but not in kind of great deal of depth, really. So I wanted to concentrate on what is it that we do that impacts on children's brains, and why is it important that we know that? So there's a whole chapter on environments, around the physical environment and the emotional environment. There's a chapter on behaviours, and I'm very particular about behaviours being spelt with an S. Because we talk about the word behaviour. This is from the PSED book, this is from the previous book, but we talk about that word behaviour, and we generally mean behaviour we don't want to see, but actually behaviours is everything that we do as humans. So it should have an S on the end. So behaviours. There's a chapter on play. There's a chapter on the role of the adult. There's a chapter on emotional and mental health. And then there's a chapter on research and reflection. And what I was trying to do as I worked through the book was say, right, okay, well, how does this work in practice? How does knowing this science help what we do in settings? And one of the things that you talked about when you sent me the email when we were talking about doing this was around behaviour and knowing that if we can recognise the range of behaviours and we see behaviour that we're not interested, if we know the reasons behind it, if we understand why, that can really help. So, we talk about, most people have heard the fight, flight, or freeze. And I often talk about it in terms of animals. So if you imagine, I think the example I use in the Little Brains Matter book is about a lion and a gazelle. So the gazelle's out on the savannah, grazing happily, and suddenly a breeze brings a whiff of a lion. And then at that split second, the gazelle has to make a decision. Can I fight? Am I big enough to fight this?
Mm-hmm.
This threat that I can smell in the distance? Can I flight? Can I run away? Am I fast enough? Can I outrun this potential threat? Or can I freeze? And there's kind of two ways freeze works. Can I stay really quiet and really still and hope nobody notices me? Or it's a split second thinking time to decide what to do next. And when I was doing the research, there's some emerging theory that there should be another three. And I love a good alliteration. So the fact that they managed to bring them with Fs really appeals to me. So there's flooding, when your body is absolutely flooded with emotion and you don't know which one to turn, and you're happy and angry and sad and jealous all at the same time. Fawning, where you try and almost coerce what's going on to so that you're not in any more danger, to minimize the danger. And then fatigue, and it's not just the, gosh, I'm tired, I've had a few busy days and I need an early night. It's that absolute exhaustion. So the gazelle out on the savannah experiences all of those things at different points. But if we think about children, we will all know children that do that. Mm-hmm. We will all know the children that are in fight mode. We will all know the children that are in flight mode. The ones that are in the freeze mode. And those are the ones I worry about the most, actually. Mm-hmm. Because the children that are in fight or flight, you can see it, it's there, it's physical. The children who are in that freeze mode, either being really quiet and hoping nobody will notice, or being very reserved and very quiet and trying to decide what they're going to do whenever there's something that they feel uncertain about. We'll know the children who are flooded with emotions. You think the typical 2-year-old? Mm-hmm. I absolutely get what 2-year-olds feel like. I get that. I completely understand what that's like. The fawning and then the fatigue, they're just so exhausted with all the stress that's going on in their lives that they don't know which way to turn. And we impact on all of that, intentionally or unintentionally, mm-hmm. consciously or subconsciously. We provide the emotional and physical environments that children exist within. So we're doing that. And that's really uncomfortable, and it makes me feel uncomfortable saying it, and it makes me feel uncomfortable when I write it. But it's us. It's adults. Now, if we know that, we're aware of it, it becomes conscious, we can think about it. So a really simple one might be, I often use examples of adults, how it would feel as an adult. So a really simple one might be taking a transitional object or a comforter off a child. We'll just put this on the shelf now so it's safer when mummy comes back. Well, how would you feel if you walked into a room and I was delivering training and I said, right, I'm really sorry, Glenn, but I'm going to take your phone off you and your wallet off you, and I'm going to put them on this shelf over here, and you can't have them back until the end of the day. And there's quite a lot of research around how adults use mobile phones as transitional objects, mm-hmm. and how we feel when that's kind of taken from us. And we then start to feel stressed. So there's the Centre for the Developing Child at Harvard, my absolute go-to place, mm-hmm. If anybody's interested, in wealth of information on their website. But they talk about this idea of 3 stress responses that we have: positive, tolerable, and toxic. And the positive stress, you need to finish your latest MA assignment. Thanks, Debbie, speaking personally at this moment in time. A bit of stress for that is good for us because it helps us to stick to deadlines. Planning a party, a surprise party, it's stressful, but it's positive and it's exciting. Tolerable is when you're having to deal with something difficult, but you've got a buffer. There's somebody there that helps you deal with that. Mm-hmm. So moving house, or having to deal with a difficult situation at a doctor's, or going to see a lawyer about something. You've got somebody with you that understands and that cares, that occasionally puts their arm around you or pats your hand, gives you a hug when you need one. Could do all of that. And the toxic is when there aren't the buffers there. And then it spills over into that toxic. And children feel all that too. And we don't like to think about children being stressed, but it's the stress responses, it's the hormones that cause the stress responses that cause the behaviours that we see in children and adults, because we all know adults that do those things as well. So a lot of this is about being human and actually understanding ourselves as humans. And if we understand, well, actually, those things trigger me and they tip me into that toxic stress. Well, actually, if it feels, when you're 5'2" and it feels like this, and you're supposedly a grown up and know what you're doing, how does it feel when you're 9 months old or 22 months old or 48 months old? And what do we need to do then as adults to make it a safe place for children? And you think about what we need as adults. We like routines. If I suddenly said to you, right, I'm going to make you go to bed after this, you can't have any tea. Tomorrow is not going to be the day that you thought it was. We're not going to have any breakfast. We'll have lunch at tea time, and messed all your day up. You'd start to worry about it. Think, well, actually, what's going on? We like routines, not rigidity, but routines of some description. Help us feel safe. Reciprocal relationships, that's serve and return. That's another thing. People are interested. Go look up serve and return, and lots of stuff on the Harvard Center for the Developing Child website. There's others as well, but they're really easy one to use. That serve and return, that back and forwards. People who listen to us, outdoors experiences. We know that being outdoors brings down stress levels. We can prove it with science. Play for children, but also for grown-ups. That time when you sign off after the end of a working day and you go do something that you really enjoy doing. The importance of touch and cuddles. And again, there's lots of research behind that. I talk a lot about Francis McGloin's research from Liverpool John Moore University. And then that links us back to that pandemic and why the dedication is to the people that supported children during the pandemic, because that absence of touch and cuddles, we all know how that felt and how difficult it was. So I suppose in a nutshell is, if I could get all that into general early childhood knowledge, I'd be a happy person, because that's the stuff that makes a difference. Doesn't matter how much you spend on equipment, all the rest. If that's not there, if you get all that there, the rest starts to fall into place. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer to your question, but that's why I do it. That's why I do it. That's why I get excited about it.
But to me, it makes sense what you've just said, you see. So I mean, we've talked about it, like I said, before we kind of recorded this one, but I was lucky enough to do the level 2 cash neuroscience course. And for me, it was a massive eye-opener. Like, why have I not learned about this before? Back in college, it was all very curriculum focused, and I think that's why I have an aversion to the word curriculum and like the forced written curriculums. And I've had many discussions with people about curriculum. Okay, my tension's easing about that one slightly, but it's that bit where, do we need to focus so much on the curriculum, or should we be focusing more on neuroscience and brain development? Because that is hugely, hugely important to understanding our little people. That, I mean, I in my previous settings where I am now, I work with 2-year-olds. And after I'd done the course, I kind of looked at them differently, going, I know what's going on in your head now. Yeah. Literally, it was like one of those, the light came on above me and the angel started singing here, like, wow. But that's why it's so important, isn't it?
It is. And, we have over 2,000 years of expertise in early childhood, right back to Plato, 400 and something BCE, was saying that play is important in early childhood. They knew that then. Over 2,000 years ago, and we're still fighting for the same things. We're still arguing about the same stuff. We're still saying play is important. We're still saying children's free time is important. I think you can bring that through history. Bronfenbrenner, my absolute hero, always first and last and every time. My favorite Bronfenbrenner quote, get it in wherever I do anything. Every child deserves at least one adult say rationally crazy about them. Always, that's not the official quote, but that's how people remember it. And then you talk about Rousseau and Froebel and Piaget and Vygotsky and Montessori and Bowlby and all of that, and then the modern experts, Dr. Jules Page from Professional Love, and Professors Chris Pascal and Tony Bertram at the Centre for Research in Early Childhood down at Crec in Birmingham. And then you bring in the science side of it. So Dr. Jack Shonkoff is my other hero at the Centre for the Developing Child at Harvard. And you add in that to the science, and neuroscience is a bit of an umbrella term. We can't have neuroscience without talking about biology and mathematics, linguistics, philosophy, chemistry, photography. If it wasn't for photography and the fact that we can now use fMRI imaging to take photographs of tiny, tiny babies' brains when they're cuddled, it makes my skin prickle. It makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We can do that. And there are people like Professor Francis McGloin at Liverpool John Moore. He has nothing to do with early childhood. He studies the nerve ending fibers and how we react to tickles when we want to scratch them and itches. So that kind of touch. He researches all of that. But they've just brought out a piece of research that proved which part of the brain lights up when a tiny baby's cuddled by its parent. And we can see photographs of that.
That's amazing.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? And so if we know that the bit of the brain that lights up when children are cuddled is also the bit of the brain that lights up when they're frightened, it doesn't take a mathematician to work that out. It's there, isn't it? It's just there in front of you. We can prove that cuddles make a difference. We can prove that being outdoors makes a difference. We can prove that 20 minutes running around makes a difference to your stress levels. And all of this is the same for grown-ups. This is about being human. So it is absolutely mind-blowing. And I think once we start to talk about all of that, again, back to why the dedication is for the adults that support you. You make a difference every day. Every single person that is listening to this makes a difference every day with the children they work with. Who'd not want that job? Who wouldn't get excited about it? Who wouldn't be passionate about it? It's why I do what I do. So when I was kind of in the classroom working with children, I'd like to think I made a difference there. And then now training and writing, if just one person takes something that I've said on a training course or I've said in a book, and then they take that away and they do something a little bit differently with the 20 children that they're working with that day, and then next year with the 30 children that they're working with next year, and then they tell a friend about it and they do it something a bit different with 30 children. That's a lot of children. I can sleep at night, because to me that's making a difference to children's lives today, now, and taking that to over 2,000 years of history, pulling that together with all the science, the real cutting edge science that we've got to make a difference to these children in the here and now.
As well, like I'm just picking up a point that you said there about the cutting edge science. I think, using the umbrella term neuroscience, I mean, there is a lot of the technology and the research that's gone before has been improved and bettered, so that we are able to understand more and more and more. And it's never going to end. We're always going to find out more. But it's one of these bits that it should be part of a practitioner's training, really, shouldn't it?
It should. And it's now, it's proven now. It's not just theories anymore. A lot of it is proven. And even if they are theories, none of what we're talking about would damage children. Having adults that listen to children, that consider environments, physical and emotional, that consider when children need a hug when they've fallen over and they're upset, that consider why 2-year-olds are as spectacularly emotional as they are. That's not going to damage children. Somebody thinking about those things and thinking about why they do what they do and how they do what they do. So even though that science is always going to be changing and always going to be developing, I don't think any of what we're saying matters. It doesn't matter that it's what we're saying now in 2023. It might be slightly different to what we know in 10 years' time or 30 years' time. But what we're saying will make a difference to children, because what we're asking people to do is to consider how that child is feeling and how that child is experiencing what's going on around it. In the whole, back to Bronfenbrenner, with the different systems around children, and how that looks for that particular child at that moment in time.
I think as well, like I said, when I did that level 2 course, it was just something, because I like learning. I think as practitioners we should never ever stop, because there's so much new research or new training or theories out there, and it's our job to kind of keep up to date with all that. But when I did that, it was one of those bits where some of the behaviors exhibited by the children in my room were, because I was working with 2-year-olds, I'm gonna use that phrase, where I'm going with this, it's just the terrible twos. But yes, but why is it called that? And I think I was able then, with my years of experience and that level 2 course, to actually join them together and go, this is what it's about. This is what's going on. Their brains are currently trying to process about 1 million things at once. And of course, they're going to have a hissy fit about something, because, wouldn't you? When you're being bombarded with so much all at once. And I think for me, it made me just slow down. It's like, I'm going to talk to you a bit slower, and I'm going to sit here beside you, and let's breathe, because it's important. We say it to adults if they're, really upset. It's like, okay, just take a breath. And, I say that now to smaller children, and they do.
Yeah.
And then you just see them relax and go, actually, somebody gets me. Okay. Might not understand what they're saying, because it's still coming out as a jumble in their words. But I think it was so important for me to actually join that together.
Yeah, absolutely. There's 2 fabulous videos. One by Alberta Family Wellness, The Brain's Journey to Resilience. And it talks a bit about toxic stress and how we can balance some of that. And it's free to access on their website. And then there's the Oxford Brain Story. They've got an online training course that's a short one that people can do and access as well, and that's free. So it's starting to get out there, and there's more information about neuroscience and about why children are the way they are. And it's a lot of it's about humans. So I said earlier, I often use adults examples of things. So I've said to people, well, how would you feel? How would you feel if that was happening to you? And, you didn't understand the language, and you didn't understand what people were asking you to do, and you didn't want to do it because actually you're really enjoying doing whatever it is that you're doing. And if we understood that a little bit more, we might be a little bit more understanding of what's going on for children. But I think you're right that as we move forward, there'll be more training programs, there'll be more open access things for people to get to. One of the things I absolutely love doing, this is my sad nerdy side coming out, is bibliographies. I love a good bibliography. And the book is rammed packed full of references and places to go look. We purposely put them at the end of every chapter, because otherwise it would have been all at the end. And I'm conscious that a lot of people don't even look at a bibliography. It's like, oh, it's got to be there so she meets the law and make sure that she's told people where she's referenced from. But actually, a good bibliography is so much more than that. So I really encourage people, if you do have a look at the book, have a look at the bibliographies, because there's websites in there, there's blogs, there's research papers, there's other books, and they're from such an eclectic range of places. There's stuff in there around anthropology that when I first started, I didn't expect to go and look at anthropology, but anthropology is about studying people. Well, actually, that's what we do in early childhood. We study little people. So, have a look through it. If it is something that interests you, have a look at the Cash Course, have a look at the Oxford Brain Story, have a look at the Brain's Journey to Resilience, have a look at Harvard Centre for the Developing Child website, and then there's the new Royal Foundation. I think there'll be more thing comes out from their research as well as they become more established, and see what's out there, see what people are talking about, and have a read of some of it, and have a think about some of the children that you work with now or in the past, or that you might work with in the future.
I mean, I agree with you as well. If I'm doing some of my own personal reading or research or whatever, I'm like you. I tend to go to the bibliography. I'm just going to pick up your book, by the way, because I just happen to have it beside me. But it's one of those things that's like, hang on, you're reading a chapter in a book and you're like, hang on, what? I want to know more about that. So you link it back to the bibliography and go, right, let me just bring this up and let's find out where it is. That's why I think I've ended up with so many books as I have, because it's like, I just want to read a bit more about that and a bit more about that and a bit more about that. But I think that's what makes us better practitioners, is by not stopping and thinking, well, I've done my level 3, whoopee, okay, I'm done, time to move on. It doesn't work like that, because research is constantly moving, it's constantly evolving.
Reflective practice, for me, is the one thing I would encourage more people to do more of. So all the books have got something in about reflective practice. This book, the Little Brains Matter book, the Little Minds Matter series in Speech Mark, has a whole chapter about neuroscience and reflective practice. So things like just having that time to sit and jot down a few thoughts. You can call it journaling if you want. You can call it taking notes if you want. I don't mind what you call it. Just do it. Just do it a little bit more. At the end of your day, just sit and have 5 minutes to think about what you've been doing. Think about the things that have caused you difficulty, the things that you've had a great time with, the things that went really well as the things that didn't go so well. And then maybe a few days later, go back and have another read of it. And how do you feel now? How do I feel now reading that? What happened? I was really hurt about that, or I was really excited about that. Why was I hurt? What could I do differently next time? Why did that one work really well? And what I've tried to show in this chapter is why reflective practice makes a difference to practice. So it works on, it's twofold. It makes a difference on practice because we think about what we're doing in more detail and we add to it. But also, journaling and reflective practice and thinking about what we've done helps with our own stress levels, the stuff that keeps you awake in the middle of the night. Because you're worried about it. If you journal it, if you jot it down somewhere, what you're saying to your brain is, you don't need to go into fight, flight, freeze mode, because I've got this. I've written it down here. What that then does is tell your hormones, you don't need to release all these hormones that are going to send my stress levels skyrocketing and tipping it over into toxic stress that I can't deal with, because I've got it here. I've written it down. I've got it covered, and I will come back to it tomorrow or the next day or whenever it is. So there's a science behind reflective practice as well, because of the stress levels. It brings it back to neuroscience, which is why it's in this particular book. It's been there at the back of my head for a long time, but it had to be the right book to put it in, and it seemed to make sense for it to go in this book. So there's a whole chapter on why reflective practice makes such a difference, and there's reflective exercises all the way through it. There's some fabulous case studies written by real people out in the field, some of them who are named, some had to stay anonymous for various reasons, but they're all real. And And so the ones that are named, you can kind of go and find them on social media and see what they're doing. But they all reflect on their practice. They all stop and think, what do I need to do a little bit differently? What do I need to do to make it right for these children and for what's happening for these children's brains in this here and now?
Thing as well, it's one of the things that as practitioners we don't do as much of, is that reflection on ourselves. Or if we do, we tend to be super critical and look at all the bad stuff. But actually, okay, yeah, we need to look at what's not gone well, but let's look at what we're actually doing really, really well. And I think that there is that kind of imbalance, because I think naturally we just want to pick out like all the negative stuff.
Yeah, I think it's historical as well, because normally when we're asked to reflect, it's to meet a training course because we've been told to do it, or it's because something's gone wrong. So we're very rarely asked to reflect when things go well. And if we know it's going well and it's working, well, then do more of it. So it's kind of a win-win situation, because it gives you the answers of, okay, well, that's working really well. Can we translate that into something else so that bit works really, really well too? So, and I think it is historical. And I think there's a fear of reflection. Well, what if I get it wrong? Well, you know what? There's no wrong way to do it. There's no right way to do it. You do it however it works for you. Yeah. Draw, do mind maps, do video blogs, do notes on your phone, write in a beautiful book if you're into stationery. There is no right or wrong way to do it. It's your reflections. It's your journal. It's your way of doing it. And you know what? You don't have to show it to anybody either. So it's very personal. So you can write whatever you want. Keep it somewhere safe. Obviously, don't leave it lying around in the staff room or the nursery or wherever at work. Keep it somewhere safe. But you can do it however you want. But the key is to think about it afterwards. It's a double loop reflection. You can find stuff on the internet really easy about it. Go back to it a few days later, particularly if it was something difficult. Go back a couple of days later, go, okay, why was this so difficult? How do I feel now? I've had a bit of space from it. Actually, was it as disastrous as it felt 48 hours ago? Because actually it probably wasn't.
No.
Or have you got a bit more information that you didn't know when you first wrote it down? That actually you found out that the person that bellowed at you in the middle of the staff meeting, you found out actually she's having a really difficult time at home. So there's some context to it. I'm not saying that excuses the behaviours, but it's easier to put it into context when you've got a bit more information. And reflection can do that. Well, it does do that, and it helps that making sense of your world, really. And we can do it about practice with children, practice with grown-ups, but there is no right or wrong way.
Brilliant. Well, Debbie, we could go on and on talking about this because it is an absolutely fascinating subject, which definitely everybody needs to know more. But Debbie Garvey, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.